Life's got a funny way of taking you where it wants to go, regardless of your best laid plans. Take Wes Fleming, for example. While he's currently the digital media editor for the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America, he's also a former history professor, photojournalist, musician, and IT guru, just to name a few. And even getting into motorcycles for Wes was sort of incidental. He'll tell you the first time he rode a motorcycle was as a passenger, and it was a terrible experience, but he couldn't wait to do it again. Not only does Wes currently create content for BMW MOA, he also hosts the Chasing the Horizon podcast, interviewing guests and sharing news from all over the motorcycle industry. And at over 150 episodes, he's not afraid to dive into the nitty-gritty of motorcycle mechanics and technology. Just ask him how adaptive cruise control works or how motor oil is made. But no matter your technical prowess, what motorcycle you ride, or how you ride it, a motorcycle rider is a motorcycle rider, according to Wes. And we're all in this sport together, wherever the road decides to lead us. This is Wes Fleming. I'm your host, Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. All right, Wes Fleming, you are on Driven to Ride. Thank you for being here, sir.
Happy to join you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and you were good enough to have me on your wonderful podcast, which we'll get to in a minute a little bit, but that's how we have connected. Let's just start at the beginning, though. What do people kind of most know you for? What's your claim to fame, as it were?
Well, I think anybody who knows me at this point either knows me from the podcast or through the YouTube channel for the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America, where I post tech videos.
Okay. Well, let's dive into the video part first. Tell me about what you do with those tech videos and what you kind of do with BMW MOA kind of as a whole.
Sure. Well, a lot of it, I've kind of, over my time with the MOA, which has reached 10 years.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you. I have written a lot of technical articles, a lot of how-tos, a lot of Q&As, some features and stuff like that, but mostly I do the technical stuff. And it comes a lot from I break my motorcycle a lot, or it breaks, or it breaks down, or because I'm one of those people that I'm like kind of the complete opposite of what you might have as a stereotype of a BMW rider.
Okay.
I'm not well off. I have all of my bikes. I've never owned a new motorcycle. So I always buy used. I usually buy from somebody that's crashed or had a problem.
Okay.
So it really, my own problems with my motorcycles has been fodder for all of my tech knowledge, because I'm one of those people that if I can't figure out an obvious way to fix it, then I'll go look it up. And I learned a lot of the things that I needed to know from YouTube. Mm-hmm. So it seemed like a way to give back, because when I was coming up, when I first started riding motorcycles, there was no YouTube. The internet was in its infancy, and it wasn't used for things like we use it for today. So
right, yeah.
To be able to, I put my clutch job on YouTube, and it's still, even though it's been, I think 2017, so 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
It's still one of the most popular videos that I ever uploaded to the YouTube channel, because it's so dramatic, because you have to literally break the motorcycle in half to get to the clutch.
Right.
So just being able to see the process, I think, helps people. And that motorcycle, especially, I had a lot of problems with. So it was constantly broke. It was great from a content perspective, because I always had something to write about.
Right.
I always had something to shoot. In the last several years, though, it's become more working on other people's motorcycles or fielding questions and coming up with ideas for that. And then kind of a little bit, whatever comes into the shop, I team up with a guy called George, who runs a shop called Gridlock Motors in Warrenton, Virginia. A little plug for him there. He only works on BMWs, so it's very convenient for my content needs.
Right.
And he does most of the work that he does is routine maintenance, because that's most of the work that all of us get done on our motorcycles.
Right.
But every now and then I'll get a call and he'll say, "Hey, I've got this," and "Hey, I've got that." And I'll grab my tripod and head on down and learn how to do something else.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, you've got no shortage of content, it sounds like. And it is really weird to hear like, oh, 2017 isn't that long ago. No, it's like 6, 7 years ago now. And
Yeah.
but the content still holds up. So that's got to be a nice feather in your cap, you know?
Yeah. And that's I think one of the great things about YouTube is if you haven't done it, somebody else has, or has done something similar to it and probably posted a video. And, like anything else, some of them are good and some of them aren't. And I can certainly see my first couple of videos were not great, not well edited. And hopefully I've gotten better at that as time goes on. But I also kind of look at it as a little bit of a insight into people's personality.
Oh, sure.
And so, so I'm not a super tight editor when it comes to those videos, because I want people to see that we're having fun and that work doesn't always have to be work. George and I joke with each other and we get along with each other pretty well. And I like for that to come through in the videos as well, because to me, being able to get a little bit of insight into the personality of the person I'm watching is sometimes as important as the content itself.
Sure. I mean, you kind of have to trust who you're listening to, and it sounds like you kind of show the honest part about putting motorcycles back together and repairing and maintaining them, and that not everything is going to fit back together exactly perfectly, or something is going to need a little bit of muscling to fit back in, or you might get confused. I mean, I think there's a lot of honesty and authenticity in that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's just fun. I have a lot of respect, a lot more respect now for people who actually make movies, just because of the tiny little sliver of work that I've done in the video industry. And I see how hard it is and how much planning it takes. So to get something like an actual movie made, that just boggles my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Same here. But let's go back a little bit to the beginning, to the dawn of the internet, as it were, before you could look up PDFs of shop manuals and YouTube videos. How did you even get into motorcycling in the first place?
I think from, I don't want to say from childhood, but certainly no, it's got to be from childhood, because I had an uncle, my mom's youngest brother, was a thrill seeker. So he was a dirt bike racer. He was a snowmobile racer. He was also a drummer, and he was the coolest person I knew when I was a little kid. And so I kind of paid attention to him. I didn't become a drummer because, I'm not a monster, but
you're not a complete psychopath.
That's right. I don't know exactly why he was interested in racing dirt bikes. I've actually never talked to him about it, but that mental picture stuck with me. And when I was 7 years old, we moved from the United States to Germany. Oh. And I have a very clear memory of sitting in the back seat. My father had already been in Germany for a year. The military was weird back then. You couldn't take your family overseas with you until you'd been gone for a year. And he picked us up at the airport in Frankfurt, Germany, in this, back then was West Germany, in this just rattle trap Mercedes. I mean, it was a janky car, but I remember, because I was the oldest of the three boys, I kind of had prime window seat,
Right. Yeah.
And I remember sitting in the back seat of the car, looking out the window, a little bit of a gray day, no clue what life had in store for me. I'd just been taken away from everything that I knew and shipped off to a foreign country, literally a foreign country. And this guy, I don't know who it was, obviously, on a motorcycle, kind of went past us, not zipped past us on the Autobahn, but kind of, overtook us.
Carried along, yeah.
And I remember sitting in the car, looking out the window, wishing I was that guy, because then I could go wherever I wanted to. And I don't know if I attached that to the motorcycle or to not being in the car, but that's like the first time I remember looking at a motorcycle and thinking, I wish I could do that. And then it didn't really come back to me until, like every other kid my age, I loved Chips.
Yeah.
The TV show, Ponch and John, and that just motorcycles were very cool in that respect. But then as a teenager in high school, my senior year of high school, a friend of mine had somehow managed to get a hold of a motorcycle, and he took me for a ride on it. And that I was hooked. I had to have it, and it was a terrible experience. Don't get me wrong. He was not safe. The motorcycle was not safe.
Right.
We were in the midst of a cicada bloom.
Oh God. Yeah.
And we rode through a cloud of cicadas and were covered with cicada parts. I was wearing a 3/4 helmet that didn't fit. And it was a terrible experience. And I had to absolutely do it again as soon as I possibly could. And I ended up buying that motorcycle from that friend, but I had to keep it at his house because I couldn't tell my mother that I had a motorcycle. And that it never ran on more than 2 of its 3 cylinders. It was a Kawasaki triple.
Yeah.
And eventually it just died. And I think, so that was probably 86, maybe the spring of 87. And by the end of the summer of 1988, I had a Honda CB750 that actually ran.
Nice.
All of its cylinders. It had a disc brake in the front. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it did have a disc brake in the front. And I rode Hondas for years, especially CB750s. I had, a dozen of them. As a matter of fact, at one point I had a storage space filled with CB750s and CB750 parts just to keep my one bike on the road.
So you had like a bunch of donors, like donor motorcycles and donor parts and all that. Okay. That's dedication.
Yeah. And I joined a group called the Vintage Japanese Motorcycle Club, VJMC.
Mm-hmm.
And for a little while, I volunteered with them because they always needed help. It was a big organization.
Sure.
And I helped run the classifieds part of the website for a couple of years. And I went to a bunch of their events, and it was just a blast having access to other people that rode. Because I didn't grow up in a motorcycle family other than my uncle. Nobody in my family has ever ridden a motorcycle that I'm aware of. My parents' friends didn't have motorcycles. My friends didn't have motorcycles except for this one guy in high school. And, so being part of the VJMC introduced me to motorcycle culture.
Sure. Yeah.
Even though it's really just a bunch of nerds because that was on the internet. Then by the early 90s. And, it was bad for my pocketbook, but it was good for my soul.
Sure. Yeah. You found like-minded individuals, and you were able to kind of get into the community of motorcycling, which is, half or sometimes more of the reason that some people get into motorcycling in the first place. So.
Yeah, exactly.
What was it about that first time? Despite the ill-fitting helmet and the cicadas, that made you want to do it again? What hooked you?
It was literally the air in my face and that feeling of freedom and not being inside a car. It just, and I love to drive, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But something about being on a motorcycle made me feel connected to what I was doing in a way that driving a car doesn't.
I like it. Yeah. Yeah, you're more involved. You're one of the things I hear it a lot, but I've noticed it a lot especially when I first started riding, is the smells. The fresh cut grass, the autumn leaves, going through cow country. That was a big one.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little more visceral of a feeling, I think, than being behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah, and although I do recommend riding through cow country, I do not recommend riding through cow processing country.
Ooh,
very different smell. Yeah. Much less pleasant.
Yeah, that do not recommend. So you were involved with Vintage Japanese Owners Motorcycle Club, and then now you're with the BMW MOA, Motorcycle Owners of America. Tell me about the journey from one to the other. Have you always kind of been involved in different motorcycle communities since that first one?
Really, just the two.
Okay.
I started with the VJMC. In 1999, I was run over by an inattentive old lady driving a car.
Okay.
Yeah. It was not pleasant. It really destroyed my motorcycle. I had to have 3 operations on my left leg. It took me a year to learn how to walk again. I still walk with a limp today.
Okay.
You know, it's been a long time, 25 years.
Yeah.
And, but the year after that, I had another bike. Actually, I had another bike before I was even off crutches. I used to have to bungee my crutches to the back of my bike to go to work, which my doctor was not impressed when I showed up to a doctor's appointment on my motorcycle.
Well, that's bold. That's real bold. You can't even fake it with a car. Like, no, I'm not riding at all. You know?
No. After that, I started parking kind of around the corner so he couldn't see me.
Right.
But anyways, so I went on a cross country trip kind of as a celebration of my recovery with a friend of mine, Jason. And we spent a little time in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And while I was in San Francisco, I had an opportunity to ride a BMW. It was a 97 or 98 R1100 GS.
Okay.
I'd never seen anything like it. I wasn't familiar at the time with BMW motorcycles. You know, it had the cylinders stuck out the side and it had this giant beak on it and it was funny looking. But the guy who owned it, we were at a big party and the guy who owned it had been drinking, so he couldn't ride it home. Mm. So they were looking for somebody who was sober to ride his bike and take him home.
Yeah.
So I volunteered. I had, I was a block from where we were staying at my friend Stan's house. And so I went and grabbed my helmet and my gloves and my jacket. And I went back and I got on this guy's bike. He got on behind me. I took him home and rode the bike back to the party because, it was halfway across San Francisco. And he came back and got it the next day. And that's when I kind of went out and looked at it in the daylight and thought, wow, that is the ugliest bike I've ever seen. But it was so easy to ride.
Right.
Wide handlebars, low center of gravity, upright seating position. It was super comfortable. It was great on the streets of San Francisco. It had so much torque.
Oh, sure. All the hills and everything.
The hills. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fantastic. And when I got home, I basically immediately started looking for a mid-90s R1100 GS.
Sure.
I found one in South Carolina, met the guy in North Carolina, put it in the back of a pickup truck that I borrowed from a friend and drove it on home. And then that led to, just like with my CB750, I had joined the VJMC. Mm-hmm. Once I had a BMW, I started looking for a BMW club.
Okay. Yeah.
And at the time, the big one around was the MOA. So I joined the MOA. There's a smaller one called the BMW RA. I joined that club as well. And through those being involved in those organizations, I came to find out about my local BMW club. And I just got involved with them and, just stuck with them. And we would do, my favorite thing that my local BMW club ever did is this thing called a tech day.
Okay.
Where basically everybody brings their motorcycles over to some dude's house and we all sit around this guy's garage and his driveway and his yard and the street outside. And we all work on our motorcycles. And most of it's routine stuff, oil changes and taking the tank off to get to this and, fix this and fix that and, put a new shock on or something. But that's where I really started to love working on motorcycles because I did not enjoy working on my CB750. It was a pain in the ass to work on.
Right.
But with the BMW Boxers, so much of it is right there.
Yeah, because it's literally out to the sides. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you want to adjust the valves, go right ahead. It's right there under that cover.
Yeah.
Just get the engine to top dead center, pop that cover off, and you're good to go. And so that really kind of got me into the community. And I got involved with the local club as a volunteer. and became the local club's magazine editor, newsletter editor.
Sure.
And so when the MOA had a turnover in editor for its magazine, which is called BMW Owners News, I basically sent some copies of my local club magazine to the MOA office and said, "Hey, I'd like to apply for that job. I felt like I could do it." And I got a very nice call back from Ted Moyer, who was the assistant executive director at the time, saying, "Hey, we've already hired a new editor, but how would you like to help out?"
It's cool.
And I said, "I would love to help out." And so that was October of 2014. And I've been there ever since.
Yeah. Well, that's impressive, man. I mean, just literally from having an interest in motorcycles and joining clubs and then kind of turning your passion into a career, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's one of those things where my background, my educational background is as a historian.
Okay.
All throughout grad school, I spent so much time researching and writing. And while I was doing that, I was freelancing as a photojournalist.
Okay. Yeah.
So I didn't get a lot of jobs because I didn't have a lot of time. But I got a few jobs, it was enough to make a little bit of money, and that made me happy. But with all of that experience researching and writing and analyzing facts and data from a lot of different sources and putting things together, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And so it really, without thinking about it too deeply, it prepared me for where I am now when I was in my 20s and 30s.
Oh, for sure.
I didn't grow up wanting to be a journalist. That's not something I ever thought I would do, let alone to write exclusively about motorcycles and motorsports.
Sure.
I thought I was going to be a teacher. I wanted to be a college professor, which I actually did for almost 20 years.
Okay. Yeah.
On a part-time basis. But I thought that was going to be my career.
Sure.
But, when you're in college, you got to do something to pay tuition and pay rent and eat food.
Still got bills to pay.
Yeah. So I worked in IT, and that company got bought, as those companies did. And that I parlayed that into a job elsewhere in the parent organization. And so I worked in IT for a long time.
Yeah.
Until eventually I ended up working as an editor for an IT company.
It's like when your powers combine, man.
Yeah. And that was the first time that all kind of came together. And so at the same time, I was teaching part-time as well. And then, and also, I was the guy that rode my motorcycle to work in DC area traffic. I was one of those psychopaths commuting around the Beltway every day for a decade plus. And then, it just all kind of came together. And at one point, the company I worked for got bought. That company then got bought. And that second round of buying, they just cleaned house. They laid off everybody. Yeah. And the first group they went after was the remote workers. And the company was in New Jersey and I was in Virginia. So they didn't care. They just cut me loose. So I got by on freelance contracts for a while, but that led to some very serious discussions with the MOA about working full time for them on a salaried basis.
Sure.
And it didn't come together right away. It took several years for that to happen, but that's the direction that I wanted to go. And along the way, I became a video content producer and a podcaster and all these other things that I never dreamed about, when I was a kid or in college or anything like that, working on a newspaper. And it amazes me sometimes the things that I get to do in my career.
Yeah.
I'm so unique, and I don't mean that as a self-aggrandizing thing. I'm not, breaking my arm, patting myself on the back, but I actually get paid to make podcasts. And that
Sure.
is such an unusual thing in the podcast world. That's literally part of my everyday job, is to make podcasts.
Yeah.
And I'm so incredibly lucky in that regard. But, I'm still also the IT guy. Yesterday I was on the phone walking a dude through how to access his new email account that I had created for him
Right.
5 minutes before the phone call. So, I'm still blending my worlds together. But I think also all that experience with computers has created a comfort zone for me when it comes to technology, where I'm really not afraid to jump into something new. And then combine that with my ability to break a motorcycle. I'm not afraid to break stuff.
Right.
I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Because with the technology, infrastructure, IT, all that kind of stuff, it's, you still have that technical kind of investigative mind where you have to problem solve kind of in a chain almost. And that's how motorcycles are kind of the same way, where, okay, well, if X isn't working, it could be A, B, or C. Let's investigate and kind of that analytical procedural mind. So they probably really go hand in hand more than you'd think.
I like to think they do, but I do still struggle with it. I broke my podcast website last week.
Oh, geez.
Completely
Okay.
shut it down. Could not figure out how to get it back. I still haven't gotten it back 100%. I got it back so that it looks, you can get to the episodes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look right. And so I've got somebody tapped to help me a little bit later this week. Because, even with as much experience as I have in the world of technology, WordPress can be a little tough to figure out sometimes, believe it or not.
Sure. Yeah. It's kind of like a blank canvas. You can do everything or nothing with it. And that's about as far as my IT knowledge goes. But I do know a couple of things about podcasts. And so do you, obviously, because you've been able to like you said, get paid to have a podcast. Chasing the Horizon is the name of it. And how'd you even kind of get started with it? Where'd the name even come from? I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it's a cool name. So.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a list maker, and when I first got the idea of doing a podcast, I was a podcast listener.
Mm-hmm.
And I still listen to this. The same podcast that I got started on is a podcast called Marketplace. I think it's published by NPR.
Oh yeah.
And it's about the financial, what's going on in the world, especially the United States financially.
Mm-hmm.
I really love the news aspect of it because I like to learn stuff and I like to know stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I started looking for a motorcycle podcast that enabled me to learn stuff and to know stuff. And I found it difficult to track down one that was doing exactly what I wanted it to, in the way that I wanted it to.
Sure.
So at some point I just went, you know what? I bet I can make a podcast, famous last words.
I was just going to say famous last words.
But the reason I kind of felt very strongly that I could do it in the first place is because, as I'm sure as you do on the wall behind you, you can see I have a guitar on the wall behind me.
You're right.
Along with my introduction to motorcycles as a teenager, I was also introduced to guitars, and I started a band, and I used to love recording my own band.
Sure.
And part of being able to do that is understanding the technology and pulling it all together. So I already felt very comfortable recording things.
Right.
2-track, multi-track, microphones, none of that stuff intimidated me. So I knew with my background in recording, I could at least get a halfway decent podcast done from a technical standpoint. So I wasn't intimidated by that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I kind of looked at all the different motorcycle podcasts that were out there, and they seemed to either be 2 or 3 people who knew each other really well and spent a lot of time talking about their motorcycles and their trips, filled with a lot of inside jokes and kind of, you really had to listen over time to make that connection.
Sure.
I felt
to be a part of it. Yeah.
Right. And then kind of the other side was things like I forget the name of it, but there's a podcast about MotoGP, about motorcycle racing.
Sure.
And that's just, two guys analyzing a race from beginning to end. And while I liked both of those things, neither one of them was doing it for me completely. And so after a while, I thought, if I want to listen to the podcast that I want to hear, maybe I should just do it, because maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe there are other people that want to listen to a motorcycle podcast that is information-based, analytical to a certain point, but also features people talking to each other and getting to know each other so that you can get to know them and at the same time learn more about motorcycles in the industry and all that kind of stuff. And that's where the idea for the podcast started, was, a news segment looking at what's going on in the motorcycle industry, and then a conversation with somebody who's part of the motorcycle industry in some way, whether it's somebody like you and I who are, I would say just podcasters, but, we're certainly part of the support part of the motorcycle industry.
Sure.
Where we help keep people stay involved and we help people get excited about motorcycling. But I wanted to talk to I wanted to talk to somebody who had ridden around the world.
Right.
I wanted to talk to somebody who knows how oil is made.
I like that. Yeah.
I want to talk to somebody who understands tread patterns on tires. I want to understand all these different aspects of motorcycle and motorcycling. So I started going after people who were experts in those areas of motorcycling and trying to convince them to be on Chasing the Horizon. And the name of it came about, I'm a list maker.
Yeah.
So at one point I just started making a list of names that I thought would sound cool. Like I was coming up with a band name is basically the way I approached it.
Not too dissimilar.
Yeah. In a number of bands over the years. And so I had a legal pad, and I would just, anytime I thought of one, I would write it down. And every now and then I'd look at the list and I go, nah, that sucks. And I'd cross it off.
Yep.
And at the end, I got down to about 4 or 5 that I couldn't cross off because they were good.
Just sounded too good.
Yeah. And then, so basically I sat down with my wife and our daughter and I said, you guys pick a name for my podcast out of these 4 that aren't crossed off. And my wife liked Chasing the Horizon, and my daughter said, yeah, that's a great name. And I was like, that's it. That's the name.
Love it. Yeah. So it was a family decision, which makes it all the better. Yeah,
exactly.
So you're not really afraid to get into like the technical nitty gritty of stuff on your podcast. Going back to the theme of learning from people, what are some maybe motorcycling or life or just other things that you've learned from doing, multiple hundreds of episodes over the course of the years doing your podcast? Anything stick out in your mind?
Certainly one of the things that I've learned is how similar we all are in our differences, which sounds very meta and kind of new agey, but one of the things that I like to find out is how people got started in motorcycling.
Sure. Yeah.
And so many of those stories start in a shockingly similar way, especially based on age groups, right? Especially. So people who are my age or a little bit older, I hear a lot of, well, my neighbor had a mini bike and,
Yeah.
People who are in their 20s or maybe their early 30s, I hear a lot of, well, I needed a cheap form of transportation.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
That kind of thing. And so I've heard a lot of the same origin story over the years.
Right.
But every single one is unique and every single one is different. And every one is informed by the makeup of your family, the makeup of your neighborhood, whether you went to, a big college or a small one, those kinds of things, just whether you lived in a big city or a farming village in the middle of Iowa. All those things are what create the differences, but it's the motorcycles that brings us all together. And that, I think, more than anything else, has inspired me to continue to pursue those stories, whether it's an engineer who understands the intricacies of adaptive cruise control, or it's, some dude who grabbed a camera and a sleeping bag and got on a 250cc dual sport and rode around the world on it.
Yeah.
At a certain level, a motorcycle rider is a motorcycle rider, and we're all in this together. And I think being able to share those stories with each other grows our sense of community, and being able to listen to those stories inspires other people to want to become part of the community.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's not as meta as you think. I mean, we're all, no matter how we came at it or what kind of riding we enjoy, we're all motorcycle riders, and we all love being on two wheels, no matter what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I see, I've been riding now for long enough to see people that I know age out.
Okay.
Sure. And some people just stop. There's a guy in my local club. We had a breakfast last Sunday, and he was there. He came to breakfast and was having a good time talking to everybody. And when we went around to talk about events and things that were going on, he stood up, he introduced himself, and he said that he was done riding and he was there to hopefully find somebody to sell his bike to, because, he wanted somebody to love it as much as he had. And, I've seen other people who, as they get older, they go to smaller and smaller bikes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. They kind of go from up in displacement back down to, in displacement.
Yeah. To make sure they can still pick them up, to a guy that I was very honored to know named Paul Mahalka, who in his life had so many different connections to motorcycling. He was a championship motorcycle racer in South America.
Oh, wow.
But he made his career in the United States selling motorcycles. That's how I knew him. He was worked at a motorcycle dealership.
Right. Okay.
And he had, unfortunately, terrible cancer, but he rode almost to the end of his life, and he just kept going down until he was finally just on a scooter.
Sure.
But he could still ride the pants off of it. And I rode with him once on his scooter and was like, how am I not keeping up with this guy?
Jeez.
Yeah. Because he was so skilled as a rider. And it was just fantastic to experience that. And so, I think, as difficult as it is sometimes to watch your friends stop riding, it's as important an aspect of the experience as your friends when they start riding.
Oh, for sure. That makes sense.
Yeah. And it's probably a little more poignant right now because over the weekend we lost an icon in the MOA, a woman called Muriel Farrington, who lived in Vermont and was a long distance rider that would put pretty much everybody to shame. I mean, she rode everywhere, and always,
Yeah.
And so her death is so fresh right now that it's a little hard to have perspective on it.
Sure. Yeah.
But, she was one of those people that I want everybody in motorcycling to meet because they're welcoming. She wanted everybody to ride. So she was always there with a smile and an encouragement, but she also would criticize if she saw something worth criticizing.
Okay. Yeah.
But she always did it in that kind of nice old lady, nice grandma way, which I appreciated because, I'm not perfect. I can take a little criticism.
Right. Well, and sometimes that hits harder than somebody coming at you guns blazing too,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
You said you took a ride out to California before.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the favorite trips that maybe you've taken over the course of your riding career?
Well, that is certainly up there in the top 5, not just because of the ride itself, but because I went with my friend Jason. We had a wonderful time. He was at a hard place in his life. I was still recovering from my crash in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One of the things that, this is kind of off topic, but one of the things that I learned as a result of my crash is that PTSD affects more than just veterans. It affects more than just people who are in combat.
Okay.
And that was a lesson that was very difficult for me to learn, and took a lot of effort and frankly, a lot of therapy. But I recognize now that I was suffering from PTSD during that trip.
No way. Okay.
And it was a much less when I got to the other side of the country because of how we took our trip and who I was with. And I had an opportunity to talk about a lot of different things with Jason in the evenings and at meal breaks and things like that.
Yeah.
So that trip absolutely stands out in my mind as one of the best I've ever taken. The year after, so during the MOA, every year has a rally, big rally somewhere in the country. I don't actually like to call it a rally. I call it a family reunion because that's the feeling it has for me.
Right.
Complete with the people you love to see and your drunk uncle that's a little handsy. We run the whole thing, but that's a family reunion. You know what you're getting into.
Right.
So we move that all around the country. We have it in a different place almost every year. And that year, the rally was supposed to be in the kind of the middle third of Montana.
Okay, yeah.
And I decided that I was going to ride.
Sure.
Because usually when I go to the rally, I'm working.
Right, yeah. You've got stuff to do.
5,000-6,000 people are coming to the rally to have fun. And a lot of those people, absolutely critical to the success of the event, they come and they volunteer. They help out, registration, security, first aid, whatever. And we couldn't do it without those people. Absolutely. But the staff, we're there and we work, sun up to sundown and then a little bit more past that. So a lot of people see the rally as their vacation every year, and that's fantastic. But for me, that's not my vacation. So I wanted to, coming out of COVID, it affected everybody differently. But one of the things that affected almost all of us is we weren't really able to travel.
Right. You couldn't go anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I realized until that point how important it was for me to go somewhere on my motorcycle a couple times a year, even if it was just for the weekend or, a few hundred miles away or whatever, but to pack the bike and go and rely on just what's on the bike and maybe a quick trip to Target if you forget socks,
Right,
kind of thing.
right.
So I decided I was going to ride to the rally in Montana, and I wasn't going to haul. I was going to take a whole week and ride to the rally and kind of pace it instead of just burn on the freeway.
Yeah, just, enjoy your time.
Exactly. So I actually rode up the first day. I rode up to Ohio, and my friend Jason, who now lives in Pennsylvania, he rode over and met up with me. Ironically, that was the only day in the whole trip that it rained constantly.
Oh, really?
It rained that entire day. But luckily my rain gear held out. So then Jason and I rode to where his parents grew up in a little town in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
So we kind of went around Chicago, and we spent a couple days up there. And then I went to Minneapolis and spent a couple of days in Minneapolis in that area. I wanted to see Paisley Park, and I wanted to see the house where Robert Persig lived at the time that he took his trip with his son, Chris, that became the inspiration behind Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a little bit about motorcycle maintenance, but is not at all about Zen. It's a long story. You have to read the book to understand that.
Yeah.
And then I rode the rest of the way to Montana, and I followed a little bit of Persig's route.
Okay.
Not road for road, because some of those roads simply don't exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But I tried to stick to the spirit of it. You know, he took his trip at a time when I think the United States was a lot less hectic, you know? And so I wanted to slow down a little bit. I didn't want to ride on the interstates unless I absolutely had to.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I didn't. The first day when it was raining and I had to go to Ohio, since it was raining anyways, I just got on the interstate.
It's like book it. Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
And then, so I spent an entire week going to the rally,
Mm-hmm.
and it was so peaceful, and it was so wonderful, and it was so just kind of, you know? And so that part of the trip really stands out in my mind, because I got to do the ride that I wanted to do at the pace that I wanted to take it. And then after the rally was over and everybody started going home, I had to go home faster than I got there, and I knew that because you know, you gotta work, and in addition to the MOA, I'm also a freelance editor. And I do other work, and one of my contracts was kind of at a high point then. So I really had to get to work.
Yeah. You don't pay it unless you get working. Yeah,
exactly. But I had never had an opportunity to explore Wyoming.
Okay.
So I took 3 days and I rode as slow as I could around Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I forget the name of the little town that I stayed in, at a bed and breakfast that had a little diner across the street. It was fantastic. And then my last night I stayed in Cheyenne.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Which is just a fantastic city. And I rode around the city for like 2 or 2.5 hours.
Just exploring.
Yeah. Just looking at, because their houses look different than ours. Which is a weird thing.
That's the West, man. It's a whole different world.
Yeah. And then so I made my way across Nebraska on the Lincoln Highway, which seemed really appropriate. And I got to Des Moines, Iowa, and I decided I was tired of not being home.
Sure.
And so I got up at 4:00 in the morning, and I rode from Des Moines, Iowa to Richmond, Virginia in one sitting. Yikes. Well, I mean, not literally one sitting. I had to get off the bike occasionally to go to the bathroom and to get gas, but I did almost 1,200 miles in one stretch with no sleep, because I was done. I was ready to go home. I was ready to, see my wife and sleep in my bed. Most important, sleep in my bed. And so that trip, probably that rally trip in 2021, the very slow pace of the first half of it, the just absolute natural wonder of those 2 or 3 days in Wyoming, and then the pound to get home at the end. So that trip sticks out in my mind in so many different ways. So those are probably the 2 trips that recently that I keep foremost in my mind.
Yeah, no, I love it. I mean, those are both kind of great examples of kind of why people ride in the first place. I mean, you don't always get to do kind of the great American road trip, but you hope you do one day. And after you kind of do a long distance ride like that, it's something that definitely does live rent free in your mind. And I've been there too, where it's like, I just want to be home. And especially like if it's like raining, like I just remember a trip back from Wisconsin where it was like, it's Monday. I have to get home. I have to work. It's pouring. I just got to do it. And you just kind of slog. And I don't know, like you go to a mental place in your head where you just kind of you're singularly focused on just getting to where you need to go. But then to be able to, experience the complete opposite of that, where it's just like, well, I'm just going to go where I want to, and this road looks interesting, or I can stop and pause for as long as I want and really savor it. I mean, kind of the best of both worlds, almost, it sounds like.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that one of my joys in life is knowing that I packed for the trip what I needed.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're prepared.
And to get to the end of the trip and realize, I didn't forget something, I didn't neglect something, and nowadays, especially as a content creator, I travel with cameras and computers and charging cables and a whole bunch of other stuff that it's really easy to forget. And, but it's also easy to kind of go overboard and take so much stuff with you that you don't have any room to bring anything new back.
Yeah, you can get overloaded, especially with audio visual gear. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. And it's really easy to do that. And, I'm one of those people that feels very strongly you've packed too much stuff, put half of it back.
Right.
You don't need that stuff. But one of the lessons I learned from my buddy Jason when we went on our cross country trip from Virginia to California, I tried to pack in a fashion that required me to do laundry a couple of times on the trip.
Okay.
And he would wear socks and underwear and throw it out. And once a week we stopped at Walmart and he would buy new socks and underwear.
Okay.
And at the time, well, I thought, well, that's just ridiculous. That's, that's wasteful. It's, but I get it now.
Okay.
Because that was his way of enjoying the trip as much as he could in the moment.
Sure.
He didn't want to, because he had just a ratty set of throw over soft bags. He didn't have a lot of storage space on the bike, and he didn't have a lot of storage space in his head.
That's fair.
He wasn't in a good place mentally when we started that trip, which meant he didn't really have the capacity for hard planning.
He didn't have the bandwidth. Yeah.
Exactly. The bandwidth. That's the perfect word. So his reaction to that was to just buy socks and underwear as he went, because that was one less thing he had to worry about.
Yeah. Make it happen. And just sounds like you said, it'd be able to enjoy not only the trip at your pace, but kind of how you want it too. I think that's an important part of motorcycle touring and travel. And it honestly it's kind of therapeutic to do it that way,
Yeah, absolutely. And while I don't travel like that, but I try to think, I have my what would Jason do moments when I'm packing for a motorcycle trip.
Right.
And if it's so that kind of led to my philosophy about taking a long motorcycle trip, which is to take half the stuff. And if you can, twice the money, save up more than you think you need and take half of the stuff that you think you need. And that's helped me a lot on my subsequent motorcycle trips.
Right. Well, I think that tidbit is a perfect way to end. So, Wes, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
I really enjoyed it, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. Me too. And let's where can people find Chasing the Horizon and BMW MOA and your content?
Sure. So the MOA is online at bmwmoa.org. And you can also find us at bmwownersnews.com. That's where most of my work goes.
Cool.
On that website, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all those things. If you just search BMW MOA, you're likely to find us. Same thing with Chasing the Horizon. I suggest people search Chasing the Horizon podcast,
right?
Because then you have, it gets us at the top. But we're also on the internet, of course, at chasingthehorizon.us, which resolves to an MOA subdomain, which is, nerd stuff. And also, on Facebook and Instagram.
Well, it sounds like pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast or anything, just search BMW MOA or Chasing the Horizon.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. And if you want the tables turned back on me, check out Chasing the Horizon, because I was honored to be a guest on your podcast. So thank you again for that. And we'll talk again soon for sure. So thank you, Wes. And it's good having you on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full, unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts, too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us, hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.